Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I wanted to briefly give some short clarification. I made a video maybe 2 weeks ago in reference to our ulama, our Islamic scholars, and the Islamic academics working together to make this ummah what it should be, to take it to its full potential. I received feedback. Some of it was on the actual YouTube channel itself, and other was backdoor via email and text message, where brothers were expressing concerns and asking questions. So I just want to sort of clarify instead of having to call each individual and type up some long, explanation. But when we look at the history of this ummah, and we go back to the golden age of Islam, and we look at who led the world in just about all aspects of the society, as far as advancements, as far as being civilized, mathematics, science at that time, medicine, education, poetry and language. Who led the world in governing its people properly with justice? It was the Muslims. It so seems that we have forgotten that Islam encompasses all aspects of the human existence. Islam governs everything that we do and everything that we involve ourselves in this world. It seems that we have sort of painted ourselves into a corner and taken ourselves out of the society. We've taken ourselves out of the things that are going on in the society, painted ourselves just into a religious corner. We only deal with those religious aspects, but we forget that Islam gives us guidance on all aspects of our existence and the society. Islam gives us our perimeters, our guidelines, what we can and what we cannot do, how to do, the best way to do something. Sometimes with the Muslims, what I have found is that when you mention academia or you mention education, it's almost blasphemous. It's almost like, well, actually, it's not almost like, some brothers seem to be against Western academia. They seem to be against education as far as secular education. And I think that's a very jejune position to take, because we live in this world. We don't live on another planet. We don't live on another plane. We live in this world. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the tools to be leaders in this world, to be those who guide upon the Sirat al-Mustaqim. We have Islam to tell us right from wrong, good or bad, and to give us a moral compass. We live in a society now that we're dealing with issues that didn't exist back in the day. And we seem to run from these responsibilities and run from these issues and only want to deal with religious knowledge and not have much to do with academic knowledge. And I absolutely think that's the wrong approach. We live in an era where we have to deal with genetic engineering. We have to deal with AI, or artificial intelligence. We have to deal with postmodernism, postmodernist thought. We have to deal with moral relativism. We have to deal with renewable energy and environmental issues. And, there's so many issues that are going on, big data, blockchain. There's so many things that affect this world today that we as Muslims need to have knowledge of that and need to know how to guide the society, how to guide the Muslims, and how to traverse all of these different issues, because these are issues that are going to affect you or your children, whether you stick your head in the sand and act like it's not important or not. It's coming, and it's hitting us right now. We have to have knowledge of the things that are going on in the world, and how do we as Muslims deal with those things. As I mentioned before, 1970, I believe it was 1977 in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, there was a collection of scholars and academics in Mecca, who got together and had an Islamic conference on how to take back the educational system, because the Muslims have been inundated and have accepted within education the Eurocentric approach, the separation of church and state, the separation between religion and everything else. We have accepted that, and we apply that in our schools. 1977, the conference and the scholars and the academics wanted to figure out how to Islamicize, if that's a word, the educational system. Okay, if you take the creator out of anything, doesn't matter what it is, if you take the creator out of anything, what do you have left? What do you have left? You have a shell. It's empty. So we as Muslims, we have to learn to integrate Islam into everything that we do in order to have the blessing of Allah. What are we told? That we're judged based on the niyyah, based on the intention, right? So when we deal with these issues, when we teach our children about postmodernism, when we teach our children about economics, when we teach our children about who should be their role models, when we talk about, whatever we're talking about, if it is void of Allah and if it is void of Islam, then it's not going to be accepted and it's going to be destructive. So this conference wanted to figure out how to create an integrated, value-based Islamic educational system. I'm educated in both the West, and now I'm educated in the East. And there is some differences. There's some differences in information and how that information is filtered. When we look at the books, when we look at the information, when we look at who is put on the pedestal, who is elevated to greatness in Western academia, it's always a European man, normally a Caucasian European man. Now, we have to look at the long-term effects of seeing people who do not look like you or who do not think like you as being the creators of civilized society, as being the innovators of everything that we covet and everything that benefits. But the children don't see anything that looks like them or resembles them or anything that they're used to. What does that do on the psyche? What does that do on the self-esteem? What does that do on the mentality of students? What is the effect of a lifetime of that, from pre-K to 12th grade onto higher education. When I began to study sociology, as I mentioned previously in the other video, alhamdulillah, I was a little bit older. I had done some global travel, had experienced some things, lived in Muslim country a few times. Like I said, I traveled quite a bit. So I was not the student that was going to sit in the classroom and just have my entire belief system given to me. I have a lifetime or a wealth of experience and things that I've seen and witnessed, things that I've read, and especially that from our religion. So we need to have an integrated value-based Islamic educational system that speaks to our worldview, that speaks to or teaches the children, or not even just the children, but teaches Muslims, gives them the foundation based on an Islamic epistemology, Islamic methodology. We need to create our own curriculums, our own books, because believe me, in Western academia, that is what they do. Their curriculum, their books are for their betterment, for their advancement, for the self-esteem of their children. We need to create that which speaks to us, that which gives us self-esteem. Our scholars and our Islamic academics need to work together. There needs to be a cohesiveness and an efficacy amongst them, and that will spread to the rest of the ummah. So when we talk about an integrated system, what exactly does that mean? I'll give it to you in simple terms. I'll give you an example. For those of you that have flown Muslim or Islamic airlines, before the plane takes off, what do you hear? You hear the dua for travel. You hear the dua that's made for the traveler. It's made over the loud system. When you fly in the US, anywhere you fly, do you hear that? That's just an example. Islam has been integrated into the flight situation for the Muslims as a reminder to remind you of Allah, to remind you of your deen. You're traveling. Maybe you don't know the dua, so the dua is made for you. Maybe you know the dua and you forgot it, or maybe you know the dua rather and you forgot to make it, but you hear it. Yeah, I have to do that. Just like in building a curriculum for school, you can integrate the Islamic worldview, the ethical system, what's halal, what's haram, and apply it. See, one thing that I think that we don't have here in America, or what we haven't had for a long time, is applicable Islam. I can read a book from any of our scholars 1,000 times, but if I don't know how to apply it, then it's not really doing me any good. It's just information. If I can't apply it, I have to be able to apply it to my reality. I have to be able to apply it and get the benefit of it, gain the pleasure of Allah by having the proper intention and staying within the guidelines of al-Islam. And I think this is something that we have forgotten. We have not given it its due importance. That our Islam must be applicable, and it should be applicable and taught from pre-K on through. We should have our own educational filter that we filter information through for the Muslims. It should be just like for the people who are academically or Eurocentrically inclined. When they think of great thinkers, when they think of great leaders, when they think of innovators in science and math and language and all these things, who do they think of? Now ask yourself, your Muslim children, your Muslim students in high school that are immersed in Eurocentric pedagogy. Ask yourself, when they think of great leaders, when they think of great academics, when they think of intellects and innovators, who do they think of? Do you think they think of Ibn Khaldun? Do you think they think of the Muslims at all? And that's because the system that they are being educated in is a system that doesn't speak to their self-worth, or teaching them self-worth, teaching them a positive self-identity. And that's something that I absolutely feel like we need to work on that. This is something that needs to be addressed. It needs to be understood, and it needs to be, again, between our ulama and the Islamic academics. I mentioned in the other video, if I need a plumber, I need something going on with my pipes, do I call the carpenter? If I want to build a deck onto my home, do I call my accountant? If I need legal advice, do I call the sanitation worker? No, I'll call the person who specializes in that field. And the beauty of it is, again, from the Islamic perspective, that person that I go to should be a Muslim. And that person should have guidance, Islamic guidance, from the people of knowledge. So when he comes to you to help you, he's working within the parameters of Islam. Hopefully that makes sense. We can't depend on the ulama for everything. We can't depend on the ulama or the scholars or the students of knowledge. We can't depend on them for everything. They have an expertise. That expertise, that Islamic knowledge, is the filter through which the secular education will go through. It's not vice versa. We don't fit Islam into the secular. We fit the secular into Islam. That gives us our perimeters. That gives us our guidelines, our limits, what we can and what we cannot do. How do we understand these issues that affect our society today? Like I said, how do we understand cryptocurrency? How do we understand investing? How do we understand, as Muslims within the perimeter, the stock market? How do we understand stem cell research? Are we for it? Are we against it? Why? What's the evidence? How do we teach mathematics from an Islamic perspective? How do we teach language? How do we teach medicine? How do we teach engineering? Who do we reference as those experts within those fields? Do we constantly look at Europeans, or do we constantly look at non-Muslims and elevate them as the go-to intellectually, academically, progressively? Or should we be, the first thought should be the Muslims. But right now, I think it's in the reverse. And I think that is the point of the Islamization of education, is to create that integrated, value-based, educational system that has the Islamic ethics in it, the Islamic worldview that is guided by the Quran and the Sunnah, which is something that we don't have now. We need to write our own educational books. Those books should be the books that are taught to our children. These books that we create should be taught to our children, just like the books that the non-Muslims write are taught to everyone's children. Why is it that we just accept what we're taught from people who are not from us wholeheartedly? We need to be able to filter what we learn in Western academia and filter it through that Islamic lens. We don't want to be ignorant and throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't want to say, well, we're not taking anything from the West. We're not going to take any academic anything from the West because everything from the West is bad. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. The educational system in the West is one of the best. It is one of the best. But it's how you filter it that determines, are you utilizing that for your betterment and your people's betterment? Western academia gives us doctors, gives us engineers, gives us thinkers, critical thinkers, analytical thinkers, people who know how to do accounting, people who know how to do all the things that we have in the society. We live in the West. Western academia produces that, but it's upon you and I as Muslims to filter that information and then turn around and say, okay, now how can I use this to benefit the ummah? First and foremost, how can I use the information that I've now obtained from secular education, filter it through that Islamic lens, and then use it to benefit the Muslims? That is the question. And that is what I think our focus should be. So hopefully that clarifies my position on Western academia, the Islamization of education, what that means to me, what I understand it to be, and how we should apply it and who should be working together. I think this is something that also needs to be understood before I close this out. We lived in a time, in an era with the Muslims that we had to make do with what we had. There was a point in time that we didn't have many educated, Islamically educated brothers and sisters in our communities. So anyone who had gone overseas and came back spoke a little bit more of the language than we did. We elevated them to star status. We gave them the microphone. They were allowed to lead. So the Islam that we were given was not a well-rounded, educated Islam. In some instances, I do believe there was agenda that had taken place. There was some issues of money and power that had crept into the equation. Fast forward, we now have plenty of brothers who have gone overseas, who have completed programs, earned degrees and certificates. They are qualified to speak on issues, qualified to teach, qualified to guide. So we don't have a need anymore for the pseudo student, the pseudo scholar, the people who were leading us previously. We really don't have a need for them. And I don't mean that in a mean or disrespectful way, because again, we lived in a time when we had to make do with what we had, but we're not in that time anymore. Now we have brothers who have gone overseas, who have degrees from Islamic universities. They're qualified to teach, to guide, to give information. But we live in an age of globalization as well. So anybody with a camera, anybody with a phone, anyone with the internet can jump on camera and position themselves as a qualified person to take Islamic knowledge from, or academic knowledge, secular academic knowledge in some instances. So I think that we need to look at who we take our knowledge from. We need to understand what is the actual level of competency that this person has. It's within the person's right to ask for credentials. Who did you study with? What program did you finish? What books did you complete? Who did you complete them with? Who are you? Because you went to Egypt for 2 years or 3 years. I went to Egypt. And I saw plenty of people who didn't study. They just taught English and picked up some of the lugha along the way. And then they couldn't come back to America and claim, well, I was in Egypt, I studied. Or I studied in wherever. We have people who went to University of Medina and flunked out of the language school. Maybe they got up to whatever level, third, fourth, fifth level, whatever. And they come back to America and they have some of the language with them. We give them the microphone because we assume, well, they speak the language. They must be educated. No, not necessarily. So we need to be careful who we take our knowledge from and what movements and groups and agendas that we associate ourselves with. And last, but definitely not least, the most important thing that we need to get straight as an ummah is our aqidah. Because the aqidah is the foundation of your Islam. It's the foundation. If your aqidah is warped, then you practice a warped version of Islam. So, I hear people talking about aqidah wars. Well, aqidah is always going to be an issue. We have Allah and we have the shaitan, and the shaitan's job is to guide you away from the proper aqidah. So yeah, there's always going to be issues of aqidah, debates in reference to aqidah. It's always going to be there because the shaitan's job is to guide you away from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. That's his job. That's what he said he's going to do. So aqidah is first and foremost, before secular education, before everything. But we don't have to do one exclusively and not do the other. We can do more than one thing at one time. We can learn aqidah and we can learn secular information as well. We don't have, we have to learn to be multitask oriented. It's not one or the other. We lived through an era where we were taught a binary approach to Islam, a very black and white, X's and O's, ones and twos type of approach to Islam. And we have to lose that type of thinking. We have to lose it. It's not productive. And the rest of the world is multitask oriented and they're moving along and we're creeping at a snail's pace because we want to study one thing at one time. We can study more than one thing at a time as long as we don't overload ourselves. But first and foremost and most important is aqidah. Make sure that your aqidah, because that is what helped me to make it through Western academia and not become twisted and warped and, in some cases leave Islam or have some crazy, type of understanding. So hopefully that is clear. Please feel free to respond at the bottom of the video in the comment section. Let me see. Please pass the video on if you find that there's benefit to anything that I've said. Anything that I've said that is of good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anything that's wrong and incorrect is from myself and the shaitan. Subscribe to the channel. And I don't produce as much as I would like. I only speak when I feel like I have something to say. I'm not one to just make videos for the purpose of making videos, but I speak when I feel like I have something that needs to be addressed. So I felt this topic needed to be addressed. I appreciate your time. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakum Allahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.